Today I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 6 of the Gospel of Matthew as we look at that section that talks about dependence on God and our relationship with God and how we should relate to God. And that would be verses 25 to 34 from chapter 6. What seems to be the main thrust of the teaching of Jesus here in terms of our relationship with material goods is that the accumulation of those goods just for ourselves is what Jesus is referring to. So the idea that I want to get as much for myself and forget about everybody else, that would be something that Jesus would say, let's take a look at that, because what's happening is we're becoming too self-centered, too narrowly focused. And Jesus points out as he's talking about this, the birds of the air, and again, you can just see Jesus in an outdoor setting, speaking to the disciples, speaking to the crowds of people that are following him, and the birds, of course, being around. So a very good and obvious example that Jesus can point to. And he says, the birds, they neither sow nor reap. They're not spending all that time in labor. And Jesus is very much aware of the difficulties of farming and the stress of farming and the hard work that's involved in farming, as most of his audience would have been involved. Most of the people would know this. So again, a good example. So they don't sow or reap, and they don't gather anything into barns, as you, of course, are busy, and you have to do that. You have to take all that and bring it into barns, and all the work that takes. Yet, Jesus says, your heavenly Father feeds them. They're not starving to death. They're being fed. So the idea is God does take care of them. And certainly we have to work hard. But God is a God who's going to provide for us. God's going to help us. And Jesus puts it, I think, in a very beautiful way, because he says, that's the birds, and that's how they are being fed and nourished. And of course, we have to work hard on farming and all of that, and that's important. But Jesus says, are not you more important than they? So again, what Jesus is doing is lifting us up and showing the value of the human person. You are more important than the birds. And the birds are beautiful and they're wonderful, and certainly they are significant, important. We must preserve them. We must reverence them too. But Jesus is pointing out that you as a person, as an individual, have a great importance, a great significance. So Jesus is building us up, talking about the value of the individual. And then I think Jesus has a very good question that we can all reflect on. And that is, can any of you, by worrying, add a single moment to your lifespan? So when you're worrying about those material goods, worrying about all of the things you have to do in life, and all of your engagements and people, what is that worrying accomplishing? Are you able to add anything to your life? Or, when you reflect upon it, does that worrying in some ways subtract from your life? So is it good? Is it positive? Is it helpful? Or is it something that is taking away from the type of person you would like to be and the activities that you would like to be involved with? It's interesting here in terms of the Greek word that is being used. The Greek word for lifespan, adding a single moment to your lifespan, can also mean stature. And the word moment, literally translated as cubit, would be translated not as a unit of time, but of spatial measure. So the cubit is about 18 inches. So the idea is, can it add anything to you as a person? You get bigger, you get better by the worry. Will that help you become a better person, a taller person, a healthier person? And that's the thought that Jesus is raising for us. So certainly we want to work hard. We want to put in our best effort. Jesus is saying it's important to do that. But at a certain point, not to have all this worrying about the outcome, but to place it ultimately in the hands of God. So Jesus says, look at your clothes. Why are you anxious about your clothes? So you're anxious about your food and what you're going to eat. And you're also anxious about your clothes. But Jesus says, learn from the way the wildflowers grow. They bloom in profusion in the hills of Palestine, those wildflowers. But it lasts only for a few weeks. So if you are anxious about your clothes and you're worried about it, well, think of the flowers. They look good initially, they're wonderful, but it doesn't last a long time. So the worry about the clothes, it's kind of a superficial worry, isn't it? Because the clothes, they're not going to last a long time. They're not going to last forever. Why should we worry about that? And certainly it's important for all of us to look good, to do our best in that regard, but certainly to be over worried about that. Because again, the flowers, they do not work, they do not spin. And Jesus says, well, I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was clothed like one of them. And of course, when we hear of Solomon, we hear the great king who was so rich and who had all this money, had a big, extensive kingdom. And Solomon, with all of that, he didn't look as good as some of these flowers look. So Jesus is trying to put it in perspective in terms of what we are desiring. And sometimes these desires that we have are really out of tune with the reality of our life. And we worry about them and get upset, and all of a sudden they're not that important, they're not that significant, and we think of all the time we've lost in our worry about them. So Jesus says, if God so clothes the grass of the field, which it grows today, but tomorrow it's just thrown into the oven, will he not much more provide for you, O you of little faith? So God takes care of that grass of the field. He takes care of the flowers and all of these beautiful things around us. How much more is God going to take care of you? Is God going to love you? Is God going to help you? It's interesting that, except for the parallel in Luke 12:28, the word translated of little faith is found in the New Testament only in Matthew, only in this one section. Parallel in Luke, but right here. It is used of him, by him, of those who are disciples of Jesus, but whose faith in him is not as deep as it should be. So they have faith, but the faith could be more intense. The faith could be deeper. They acknowledge Jesus. They love Jesus. But they're holding back a little bit in terms of their faith. So Jesus is trying to get us to value the things that are really important and significant, to base our faith on them and not on these other aspects which are not that important really in the long run when you think about it. All that worry about our food, all that worry about our clothes, and where is that going to lead us ultimately? Will that lead us to have a better life? Will that lead us to have a richer life? Or we have little faith? We have some faith, and that's wonderful. But what is that stands in the way of our little faith becoming a deeper faith, becoming a stronger faith? And those are the questions I think that Jesus is posing here in this section of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6.